Light up your fire.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if you can hear these birds. They're called chakalakas. They make a lot of noise. Confidence is often described as something you either have or you don't. I said somewhere. I said this somewhere else. And internal posture, though, is something deeper than confidence. By the way, welcome to the Sovereign Voice. I'm Roxana Fiamma, the creator of Lingosomatica. And today I'd like to share a bit of my story that relates to this because we all live inside our stories. Some of these stories are inherited and they are whispered so often that we end up forgetting that they're actually not ours. And now I see this clearly, but during my academic years, and for a while after that, I didn't see that. Back then, I was so identified with the certain story that all I could see was fragmentation and uneasiness. I was navigating a narrative around belonging, language, about who I was allowed to be when I spoke, and most of all when I wrote, because I was at university. And I was breathing between two cultures. There were two very different ways of relating English and Italian. They held like almost two highly distinct emotional grammars, so to speak, which clashed, of course, with my experience at university at the time in the UK. And sure, it gave me range, but at the time, it also gave me a lot of grief because English still felt more like in my head than in my body. And I felt lost, didn't know who I was. On paper, I'm a native English speaker, but for years, English didn't feel like it belonged to me. It was more like I belonged to it in my obsession to master it. And so there was this hidden dissonance in me. I wouldn't say was dramatic, but it was definitely unsettling. I remember it. And I had the sense that my English still belonged within the confine of an Italian structure, especially when I was writing essays, because English and Italians structurally are very different. And I felt like a walking hybrid that made me come across surely as odd as I could be with to the academic establishment. And with that came a question I didn't know how to name then. Who am I? And most of all, whose voice am I actually speaking with right now? Have you ever asked yourself that? This inner fragmentation drove me to filmmaking. Well, more than drove me, led me to filmmaking, which helped me to articulate things that I couldn't articulate with words. I was reading English and media studies, so my dissertation could combine both the academic research and on identity and diaspora and with a short film. And so filmmaking and editing in particular led me to places deeper than theory, which gave voice to something more visceral than thoughts and words at the time. And so these questions were very personal about what happens when identity is shaped across languages. I'm sure bilingual and multilingual people can relate to this. I'm not the only one. And then what changed for me wasn't an immediate insight. It was actually when a lot later, it happened a lot later when I was invited at other universities to show my short, which was called Exiles, and it was introduced obviously within the framing of cultural identity. And so there was a speech, a talk about my work. And so when people watched my films, especially the monolingual audiences, their reaction really surprised me. They recognized themselves in it, and I didn't expect that. And I thought they have different stories, different lives, but they have the same underlying sense of loss. And that was a big eye opener, because that's when my understanding of it flipped completely. I just was spat out of my narrative, because this wasn't just a multilingual experience, of course. Sure, multilingual professionals often locate that tension in language, and yes, it's more immediate, but other people experience it too through different narratives, whatever that may be. But underneath it all, there's the same human pattern. And that is that we are all trying to own our voice, while parts of us still wait to be told that it's okay to do that. And the thing is that it's so obvious, but when you are so embedded and so taken by your story, so immersed and identified with that story that you're running yourself, you just cannot see that. And so all you could see, and this is true for multilingual leaders, this isn't an abstract experience like many of these people in the audiences. They just, they had something like my story that helped them realizing we feel the same. It's not to do with language or cultural identity, because we live in our own same language, same identity, same culture, but we still have that. We just don't know how to point it, how to pinpoint it, how to articulate it. But for us, multilingual, it's more of a lived experience, and it's destabilizing at times, because every time we shift from one language to another, we also shift our essence. And so our presence recalibrates, if you think of it. The posture tilts and timing bends a little bit. And so that voice adjusts, and what we allow ourselves to express either shrinks or grows. And the adjustment is something that can be a double-edged sword, because the adjustments allows you to gives you more range, and you realize that what can feel like fragmentation is often something else entirely. It's like a training ground. You learn to adapt, to read people, and hone the skill of holding more than one perspective, which is great. It's very empowering to know that you can adjust in between frames, structures, with time. At the time, it was painful, but with time, you realize that that's an asset for multilingual leaders, I'd argue. But if you're not careful, you also learn to edit yourself prematurely, because this quality of adaptation on the fly, if you're not regulated, it can become an armor, a strategy to protect yourself and prevent you from growing. So you end up adapting and editing yourself and even censoring yourself, and that can be dangerous. So in the end, that recognition at the time changed everything for me, that internal gap wasn't something just unique to me. We all feel it. It's part of the human experience. It was like recognizing that I'm not special in my isolation, and it doesn't make me feel isolated. And it's just a human experience. It's only that everyone has a different narrative of it. And this is why awareness of story is useful to cultivate, because nonetheless is a story. You need to ask, because the story we're living inside ourselves somatically shapes how sovereign we feel when we speak and in any other situations. And once you notice that story, you can't unsee it. And you're no longer fully inside it. You can see it more and more easily. And over time, you can catch it earlier and earlier, especially if you are telling that story in the background when you are in a public speaking situation where it's important that you keep your cool. So that's the work. And so if this resonates with you, I am offering a free 20-minute Lingosomatica diagnostic session, which is a conversation that invites you to explore a deeper aspect of you as an authentic communicator. And it's also a way to gauge how this coaching works. And after that, whether or not we'll continue to work together, you'll have gained new insight about yourself. And that's what matters. If that calls you, the link to connect with me is below. Before I go, I'd like to ask you, what's your experience of this? What is your internal story? Share it in the comments with us if you like. I'd love to know. For now, stay with what you noticed. I see you next time.